There are stories meant to be forgotten, whispers carried by the wind, shadows that move when no one's looking. But some stories refuse to fade because they hold a truth too terrifying to ignore. Are you ready to listen? Welcome to Sounds of the Unknown. It started with a whisper. Michael had just moved into a small rental house in the countryside, looking for solitude after a difficult breakup. The house was old but charming, surrounded by dense woods. The landlord had given him a great deal, perhaps too great. The first night was uneventful, but on the second, as he lay in bed with the window slightly open, he heard it, a soft whisper just outside. At first he thought it was the wind rustling through the trees, but the whisper grew clearer, forming words he couldn't quite make out. He sat up, his heart pounding, straining to listen. The voice sounded like it was right outside the window, repeating the same phrase over and over. Then came the knock, 3 slow, deliberate taps on the glass. Michael shot out of bed, turned on the lights, and yanked the curtains open. No one was there. The night was still, too still. Even the usual sounds of crickets and rustling leaves had vanished. The next day, he convinced himself it had been his imagination. But that night, the whispering returned, and this time it was inside the room. Panicked, he turned on every light and checked every corner. Nothing. But the moment he got back into bed, the voice came again, right next to his ear.
"Let me in."
Michael didn't sleep that night. The next morning he packed his things and left, without even notifying the landlord. Days later he received a call from the property owner.
"You didn't see him, did you?"
The landlord asked hesitantly.
"Who?"
Michael demanded.
"The Whispering Man.
The landlord said in a hushed tone.
He only comes when someone stays longer than 2 nights."
Michael never looked back. Lena was never superstitious, but the antique mirror she bought at a thrift store made her uneasy from the start. It was beautifully crafted, its frame an intricate weave of dark wood with strange carvings. The store owner had given it to her for a fraction of its worth, warning her not to keep it in her bedroom. Of course, Lena didn't listen. The first week, nothing happened. But soon, she started noticing small things. Objects in the reflection would appear slightly out of place, or shadows would linger longer than they should. Then she saw her. One evening, while brushing her hair, Lena caught movement in the mirror. At first, she thought it was just her imagination, but then she noticed something terrifying. The reflection of her room was normal, except for one detail. There was a girl standing behind her. Lena spun around, but the room was empty. Heart hammering, she looked back at the mirror. The girl was still there. She was young, pale, with hollow eyes and dark hair framing her face, and she was staring directly at Lena. Lena covered the mirror with a sheet that night, but she could still hear soft tapping coming from behind it. The next morning she returned to the thrift store, desperate for answers. The owner looked at her with pity.
"It shouldn't have taken it,"
he sighed.
"The girl, she is trapped inside, and now she's seen you."
Lena never went back home. Tom and Sarah had just bought their first home, a fixer-upper in a quiet neighborhood. It needed work, but the price was right, and they were excited. The only thing that unnerved Sarah was the attic. It was one of those pull-down ladder types, and from the moment they moved in, she felt uneasy about it. She swore she could hear faint scratching noises coming from above, but Tom dismissed it as rats. One night, after hearing loud thumping noises, Tom decided to check it out. He climbed the rickety ladder, flashlight in hand, and poked his head into the dark space. Something was up there. At first he thought it was just an old dress form, the kind tailors used. It stood in the middle of the attic, facing away. But as he moved his flashlight, he noticed it had arms and legs and a head. The worst part? It slowly turned toward him. Tom fell backward, crashing down the ladder. Sarah ran into the room to find him shaking on the floor, mumbling about a person without a face. They moved out the next day. The new owners later found something in the attic, a mannequin-like figure made of stitched-together fabric and human hair. No one knows where it came from. David loved hiking, but one solo trip nearly cost him his sanity. He had set up camp deep in the woods, far from civilization. The first night was peaceful, the second not so much. Around midnight, he woke up to soft footsteps circling his tent. At first, he assumed it was an animal, but the steps were deliberate, too slow, too measured. They would stop right outside his tent, then continue again. Holding his breath, he grabbed his flashlight and unzipped the tent slightly. The beam of light cut through the darkness, revealing nothing. The footsteps stopped. The moment he zipped the tent back up, the whispering started. It was faint, just beyond the fabric of the tent. It sounded like multiple voices speaking at once, overlapping, forming words he couldn't understand. Terrified, David grabbed his knife and waited. Hours passed. Eventually, the whispers stopped. At dawn, he emerged from his tent, exhausted but relieved. That's when he saw the footprints. Not just one set, but dozens, circling his tent over and over. Some of them weren't even human. David packed up and left immediately. He never went camping again. Mia lost her grandmother when she was 12. They had been close, and losing her was devastating. A week after the funeral, Mia's mother received a call in the middle of the night. It was from her grandmother's number. Thinking it was a prank, she let it go to voicemail. The next morning, curiosity got the best of her, and she played the message. It was nothing but static. At first, then came the whispering, Mia's name over and over. Terrified, her mother deleted the message and called the phone company, but they insisted the number had been disconnected. That night, Mia woke up to a soft voice calling her name. It was coming from her closet. When she finally worked up the courage to look, nothing was there. But the next morning, her grandmother's favorite locket was lying on the floor. A locket that had been buried with her. Some dismiss them as myths, figments of imagination crafted to send shivers down our spines. Others claim they are echoes of something far more sinister, events that linger at the edges of reality, refusing to be forgotten. But whether you believe in the paranormal or not, one thing is undeniable. Some things defy explanation. A whisper in an empty room, a shadow shifting where none should be, the sensation of unseen eyes watching from the darkness. These are the moments that crack the illusion of safety, forcing us to confront the terrifying possibility that we are never truly alone. For centuries, people have shared chilling encounters, warning future generations of things best left undisturbed. Spirits bound to objects, entities lurking in the woods, voices calling out from the other side. These stories persist, not because they entertain, but because they carry a truth too unsettling to ignore. So if you ever hear a whisper in the dark, whatever you do, don't answer.